Evelyn stood in her mother's living room, the air thick with the scent of old roses and dust. The family lawyer's voice droned on, reading the will in careful, practiced tones. Her older sister Susan sat ramrod straight, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mark, the youngest, fidgeted with his wedding ring, eyes darting between the lawyer and the floor. Evelyn listened, waiting for her name. She'd spent years caring for their mother doctor's appointments, late-night phone calls, endless errands. She'd missed promotions, postponed vacations, and quietly paid bills no one else noticed. She wasn't expecting riches, but she hoped for a sign that her sacrifices had mattered. The lawyer finished reading. The house, the savings, the jewelry, everything was divided between Susan and Mark. Evelyn's name was mentioned only once, attached to a small box of old family photos and a letter in her mother's careful script. She tried to keep her face neutral as Susan and Mark exchanged awkward glances. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Your mother wanted you to have these, Evelyn. She said you'd know what to do with them." Evelyn nodded, her hands trembling as she accepted the box. The room felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in. She forced a smile, congratulated her siblings, and excused herself before the tears could fall. Outside, the autumn wind stung her cheeks. She sat in her car, clutching the box to her chest, and let the grief wash over her. It wasn't about the money or the house. It was about being seen, being valued, being remembered for all the invisible work that had kept the family together. She opened the letter, her mother's handwriting looping across the page. "My dearest Evelyn, I know this isn't fair. I wish I'd been braver. You were always the strong one, the one who held us all together. I hope these photos remind you of the love you gave, even when it wasn't returned. Love, mom. Double quotes. Evelyn pressed the letter to her heart, the ache of rejection mingling with a bittersweet pride. She had been left out of the will, but she knew, deep down, that her worth was never measured in dollars or deeds. Still, the wound was fresh, and the silence that followed felt endless. As she drove home, Evelyn promised herself one thing: she would not let this be the end of her story. Evelyn's house felt emptier than ever. The box of photos sat unopened on her kitchen table, a silent reminder of everything she'd given and everything she'd lost. She moved through her days on autopilot, watering her plants, making tea, answering polite texts from Susan and Mark. They checked in, but their words felt hollow, as if they were already moving on, dividing up their new inheritance. She tried to keep busy, but the quiet pressed in. She found herself replaying old memories. Her mother's laughter in the garden, the way her siblings used to run to her for help with scraped knees or broken hearts. She remembered the years she'd spent as the family's anchor, the one who remembered birthdays, who organized holidays, who always knew how to fix what was broken. Now, she wondered if any of it had mattered. She scrolled through her phone, pausing on photos of family gatherings: her mother's last birthday, Mark's wedding, Susan's retirement party. In every picture, Evelyn was there, smiling in the background, holding a tray of food or a child or a camera, always present, always supporting, but never the center of attention. One evening, Evelyn finally opened the box. Inside were faded Polaroids, handwritten notes, and a few pressed flowers from her mother's garden. She sifted through them, tears slipping down her cheeks. Each photo was a piece of her own story, a story her family seemed to have forgotten. But as she looked closer, she noticed something. In every photo, she was the one holding someone else up, a hand on a shoulder, an arm around a child, a smile that steadied the room. She realized that her mother had seen her after all, maybe not with money or heirlooms, but with the quiet acknowledgement that Evelyn had been the family's lifeline all along. That night, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "I was left out of the will, but I was never left out of their lives." Maybe that's what matters most. The silence didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt like space to breathe, to grieve, and maybe to begin again. Evelyn woke to a gentle sense of resolve. The ache of exclusion was still there, but it no longer defined her. She spent her mornings walking through the neighborhood, letting the crisp air clear her mind. She noticed things she'd once overlooked: a neighbor's overgrown garden, a child waiting for the school bus alone, an elderly couple struggling with groceries. She realized she still had so much to give, even if her own family couldn't see it. One afternoon, as she sorted through the old photos, an idea began to take root. She remembered how her mother used to say, "When you feel lost, help someone else find their way." Evelyn decided to volunteer at the local community center, offering her time to families in crisis, organizing meals, running support groups, and lending a listening ear to anyone who needed it. Her skills, honed over decades of caring for her own family, quickly made her indispensable. She became the person people called when they didn't know where else to turn. She helped a single mother find housing, comforted a widower through his first holiday alone, and started a weekly supper club for neighbors who had no one else to eat with. Word spread, and soon the community center was thriving. Evelyn's quiet leadership drew people together, creating a network of support that reached far beyond her own grief. She found herself smiling again, her days filled with purpose and connection. Meanwhile, her siblings' lives began to unravel. Susan's business hit a rough patch, and Mark's marriage was strained by financial stress. The inheritance, once a source of pride, became a burden. Legal fees, unexpected repairs, and mounting bills. They reached out to Evelyn, not for money, but for advice, comfort, and the steady hand they'd always relied on. Evelyn listened, offered guidance, and helped them find solutions. She didn't mention the will or the hurt she still carried. Instead, she focused on what she did best, holding her family together. Even from the sidelines, one evening, after a long day at the center, Evelyn wrote in her journal, "I may not have inherited their wealth, but I've become their lifeline, and maybe that's the legacy I was meant to leave." She closed the journal with a sense of quiet satisfaction. She was no longer waiting to be chosen, she was choosing herself, and in doing so, she was changing everything. Evelyn's world blossomed in ways she never expected. The community center, once a quiet afterthought in the neighborhood, now pulsed with life. Children's laughter echoed from the art room. The kitchen buzzed with volunteers preparing meals, and the bulletin board overflowed with thank you notes and photos of smiling faces. Evelyn moved through it all with gentle authority, her presence a steady current that kept everything flowing. She found herself surrounded by people who valued her not for what she owned, but for who she was. The single mother she'd helped found a job and brought her daughter to the center every week, always with a fresh bouquet from their tiny garden. The widower she'd comforted became her chess partner, their games a quiet ritual of healing. Even the shy teenager who once sat alone at the supper club now led a poetry night, inspired by Evelyn's encouragement. Evelyn's siblings noticed the change, too. Susan called more often, her voice softer, less hurried. She confided in Evelyn about her business troubles, seeking advice and reassurance. Mark stopped by the center one evening, watching from the doorway as Evelyn led a group in laughter and conversation. He lingered after everyone left, admitting he missed the closeness they once shared. "I didn't realize how much you did for all of us," he said quietly. "I'm sorry, Evie, we took you for granted." Evelyn smiled, her heart both heavy and light. "It's never too late to start over, Mark. Family isn't about what you inherit, it's about what you build together." As the weeks passed, the center became a second home not just for Evelyn, but for her siblings as well. Susan volunteered her time, teaching financial literacy classes. Mark helped with repairs and started a father-daughter game night. The three of them, once divided by resentment and misunderstanding, found new ways to connect, ways that had nothing to do with money or inheritance. Evelyn realized she had created something her mother would have been proud of, a place where everyone belonged, where love was measured not in possessions, but in presence. One evening, as she locked up the center, Evelyn paused to look at a photo on the wall, a group shot from the latest supper club. Her arms around Susan and Mark, all of them laughing. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly seen. She whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I finally understand." The change in Evelyn's family was slow, but unmistakable. Susan and Mark, once so sure of their inheritance, now found themselves turning to Evelyn for more than just advice. They sought her company, her calm, her way of making even the hardest days feel manageable. The community center became their meeting place, a neutral ground where old arguments faded and new memories took root. One Saturday, Susan arrived early, carrying a box of pastries and a tentative smile. "I thought I'd help set up for the supper club," she said, her voice softer than Evelyn remembered. They worked side by side, laughter gradually replacing the awkward silences that had once filled the air. Mark joined them later, his daughter in tow. He watched as Evelyn showed the little girl how to fold napkins into swans, her patience and warmth drawing the child in. "You always had a way with people," Mark said, his eyes shining with something like regret and gratitude. That evening, as the supper club filled with neighbors and friends, Susan stood to make an announcement. "I want to thank my sister Evelyn. She's the reason this place feels like home. She's the reason our family is still a family." The room erupted in applause. But it was the look in Susan's eyes that meant the most. For the first time, Evelyn saw not just acknowledgement, but genuine respect and love. After the guests left, the siblings lingered in the quiet. Mark cleared his throat. "We've been talking, Ev, about the will. About everything. We want to make things right." Evelyn shook her head gently. "You already have this." She gestured to the center, to the laughter still echoing in the halls. "This is what matters." Susan hugged her, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We're so sorry. We should have seen you all along." Evelyn smiled, her heart full. "You see me now. That's enough." As they locked up together, Evelyn realized that the family she'd always longed for was finally, truly hers, not because of what she'd inherited, but because of what she'd given, and what they'd finally learned to give back. The next month, the community center hosted its biggest event yet, a celebration of local heroes. The board insisted Evelyn be honored, but she tried to deflect the attention. "I'm just doing what anyone would," she said, but her friends and neighbors wouldn't hear of it. Susan and Mark arrived early, carrying a surprise. A framed certificate and a scrapbook filled with letters from people Evelyn had helped. As the evening unfolded, the room filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of home-cooked food. When it was time for speeches, Susan took the microphone, her voice steady but emotional. "My sister Evelyn has always been the heart of our family, even when we didn't see it. She gave without asking, loved without conditions, and built a home for all of us here and in our hearts. We made mistakes. We let money and pride blind us to what really matters. Tonight, we want to say thank you, and we want to make things right." Mark stepped forward, placing the certificate in Evelyn's hands. "We've spoken to the lawyer. We're sharing the inheritance, but more than that, we're sharing the work. This center, this family, is yours as much as ours." The applause was thunderous, but Evelyn's eyes filled with tears for a different reason. She realized she no longer needed the inheritance to feel whole. The love and respect in the room were worth more than any sum of money. After the ceremony, neighbors and friends lined up to thank her. Some shared stories of how Evelyn's kindness had changed their lives. Others simply hugged her, grateful for the warmth she brought to their world. Later, as the lights dimmed and the last guests left, Susan and Mark sat with Evelyn in the quiet hall. "We can't change the past," Susan said, "but we can build something better together." Evelyn smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "That's all I ever wanted." In the gentle hush after the celebration, Evelyn found herself sitting alone in the community center's kitchen, a cup of tea warming her hands. The scrapbook from her siblings lay open on the table, filled with handwritten notes, photos, and drawings from children she'd helped. Each page was a quiet testament to the life she'd built, not through inheritance, but through kindness, patience, and love. Susan and Mark joined her, their faces soft with gratitude and relief. They talked late into the night, not about money or regrets, but about plans for the future, new programs for the center, family dinners, ways to stay connected. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the ache of old wounds replaced by the gentle balm of belonging. The next morning, she walked through the neighborhood, sunlight dappling the sidewalks. Neighbors waved, children called her name, and Evelyn felt a peace she hadn't known in a long time. She realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to move forward with an open heart. At the next family gathering, Susan handed Evelyn a new family photo. This time, Evelyn stood in the center, arms around her siblings, laughter lighting up her face. She slipped the photo into the scrapbook, a symbol of the second chance they'd all been given. As the evening drew to a close, Evelyn looked around the table at her family, her friends, her community, and felt a quiet joy. She had become the family's lifeline, not because of what she'd inherited, but because of what she'd given. And in that giving, she'd found everything she truly needed. If this story touched your heart, follow and subscribe to Kindred Echo, where every heartbreak finds its voice and every lesson blooms again.